Jeff Thorne moved like someone who didn't belong to any one planet. Maybe because he didn't. His boots pressed into the chromium floor of the Starliner Vega Drift, the lounge light catching on his worn jacket, a Federation-issue pilot coat, retrofitted with stealth thread panels and micro-ammo pouches hidden in the lining. He wore his dark hair cropped short, his jawline stubbled, his hazel eyes scanning every room like he was always 3 seconds away from drawing a sidearm, the scrap belt stretched before him like a dead god's ribcage, its twisted hulks silhouetted. Against a blood-orange nebula, James Cade adjusted the stabilizers on his suit as Starling, his newly acquired and barely functional tug-class ship, drifted past the remains of a shattered cruiser. The cruiser bore no name now, just a flaking hull etched with scorch marks and frostbite from 50 years of abandonment. Somewhere out there, he knew, was Echo ID 0. People knew the name Jeff Thorne, not because he made headlines, but because he never did. Mercenaries in the Helix rings whispered about a Federation ghost with too many aliases and no recorded rank. Criminal syndicates called him the Dancer, because by the time you realized he was on your ship, he'd already taken what he came for and disappeared into warp. Espera, the ship's rudimentary AI, crackled to life through his earpiece. Gravitational, anomaly detected, localized within coordinates, but tonight Jeff wasn't working. Not exactly, I see it, James muttered. He magnified the feet on his visor. He was orbiting the pleasure moon Lyora, nursing a half-glass of Creelin whiskey and pretending not to be eavesdropping on the Dravik diplomat 2 tables down. His smile was casual, practiced. The woman sitting across from him, a velvet-dressed singer named Alia, tilted her head with a flirtatious smirk. Amidst the cloud of drifting wreckage, something pulsed, not with light, but with absence, like a hole torn in the logic of space, where starlight bent away and sensor feeds glitched into static. That was the signature. Every relic in the Oracle fracture broadcast a different anomaly, heat, magnetism, even spontaneous hallucination. But Echo ID 0 was something else. It broadcast memory. "You're not really listening to me, are you?" she said, tracing the rim of her glass. James reached to his belt and pulled free his analog camera. A relic in its own right, the thing clicked softly as he captured a frame of the impossible. He flipped open the rear panel. Jeff turned back to her with a charming laugh. "You were saying something about growing up on Siren 5. Farm girl. Turned jazz goddess?" The photo began to develop in real time. She narrowed her eyes. "Nice save." He waited, watched. The music swelled behind them. A synth harp trio played something languid and sultry. Alia leaned in, brushing her fingers. Along Jeff's hand image was not of the void he had seen. "Tell me something real, Spacer. Something not in your fake bio chip." It was of a girl. He looked at her for a moment, considering. Then, with a crooked smile, Lyra. "I once piloted a dropship into a plasma storm just to save a cat." His sister's face stared back at him. Hair floating around her like she was underwater, eyes wide in warning. But behind her, something moved. She laughed. "Liar!" James tore the photo out and slid it into the inner lining of his suit. He winked. "Maybe, but I am a cat person." Knew better than to trust what the camera showed him, but it had never lied. Before the banter could go deeper, Jeff's ocular HUD lit up. An encoded pulse from his internal comm implant. Priority alert. Package breach. Sector Theta 6. Authorization. Echo Black. His smile faltered for only half a heartbeat. Then it was back. "I need to use the refresher," he said smoothly. "Should I wait?" Jeff leaned in, kissed her cheek. "Always." He slipped through the corridor of the club, past security checkpoints with forged passes, until he reached the docking platform. His personal ship, the Jade Whisper, sat cloaked and idle in Dock 17. He tapped the underside of his wrist and activated a stealth relay. His surroundings shimmered as his bodysuit engaged in active camouflage returned to the Starling's bridge. narrow cockpit lined with dented panels and bundled wires that sparked whenever they broke warp. Kane, the ship's medic and former black site trauma surgeon, looked up from a cracked datapad. The mission had changed. Find something? Echo Black wasn't just a Federation Ghost protocol. It meant one thing: a traitor inside their own ranks. And Jeff? He was the cleanup. Maybe, James said, tossing him the camera. Don't stare too long. By the time the crew assembled in the narrow galley of Starling, the void had gone quiet again. The Oracle fracture no longer pulsed. The memory signal had vanished, but the effect remained. James stood before a flickering 3D projection of the anomaly, its chaotic gravity patterns mapped in crude blue wireframe, rotating slowly above the galley table, his jaw clenched. His gloved finger pointed to a narrow crescent of navigable space threading between two gravitational shears. That's our entry vector. Beside him, Kane exhaled hard. You sure you don't want to not die today? Lyra's in there. You don't know that. James tapped the camera again. The photo had changed. Now Lyra was standing beside another figure, tall, hunched, unreadable, no face, just a shimmer where skin should be. They stood on a floor of black glass beneath a sky. That wasn't space, I know. Across the table, Syrah's new body, a humanoid frame salvaged from a disarmed Dominion concierge droid, shifted in place. Her hollow eyes glowed with soft azure light. Your trajectory assumes stable mass zones, she said, tone flat. But if the internal geometry of the anomaly is non-Euclidean, we may not have an exit vector. We won't need one until we find her, James said. Syrah cocked her head. That is not optimism. That is statistical blindness. Welcome to the crew. The Starling entered the fracture at quarter thrust, the hull groaning under the strain of disrupted physics. Inside, time faltered. Clocks skipped forward. Lights dimmed in rhythmic pulses like the heartbeat of something sleeping. Or dreaming? James gripped the flight yoke. Hold steady, he muttered. No sudden bursts. Just ride it in. Outside, the stars stretched into spires. The nebula vanished. In its place, a black vault, and within it, drifting silently like a forgotten thought, was a ship. Not Dominion, not human, not anything recorded. It was bone white, crescent-shaped, almost organic in appearance. A single black tower jutted from its underbelly, carved with symbols that didn't glow, but absorbed light. James whispered, "The Night Vault?" Kane looked up sharply. "You know this ship?" "I've seen it before." He reached into his suit and pulled a second photo, one he never showed anyone. Lyra, standing at the top of a glass staircase, behind her, the Night Vault. They docked with the alien vessel, using a mag spine to bridge airlocks. Syrah went first, sensors extended. No life readings, no atmosphere. Inside, silence. Walls of smooth, mirror-black obsidian stretched in impossible angles. Hallways that turned back into themselves, rooms with no floor, doors that opened with soundless breath, and the writing, those same symbols etched into everything, glimmered now with faint crimson veins. Kane muttered behind James, "If I ever write a memoir, remind me to title it Bad Ideas That Started With You." James didn't respond. He had heard her voice again, faint, calling. They found the chamber within 2 hours, circular, dome-shaped, a single platform in the center, ringed by glass monoliths, each one containing a person, human, alien, things with too many arms, all frozen in motion as if plucked from time mid-sentence. And there, closest to the center, was Lyra. James sprinted across the bridge. Syrah reached out. "James!" But he was already placing his hand on the monolith's surface. Rippled, then pulled. The world blinked. James stood alone. No dome. No night vault, just an endless white plain beneath a black sky. Lyra sat cross-legged before him, eyes hollow. "You're not supposed to be here," she said. "I came for you." She shook her head slowly. "No, you came for the truth." "What?" Truth, behind her, Figures began to form, shadows without detail, shapes of memory. The breach? She whispered. It didn't just take me. It opened something. And I saw everything, every mind lost to the fracture, every soul who touched it. James stepped closer. We can leave. Together. You still think this is about rescue, she said. Her smile was sad. But it's becoming. And now, you're part of it. She reached out, touched his forehead, and the world screamed. James awoke with a jolt, back aboard the Starling, blood on his nose, Syra hovering overhead. You stopped breathing, she said. How long? 28 seconds. Kane helped him sit. You touched the glass and collapsed. The chamber's gone. Gone? Syra nodded. Vanished. The ship's gone, too. Sensors report we're back outside the fracture. James stared out the viewport. Nothing remained, but the photo in his suit pocket had changed again. Now he was in the frame, standing beside Lyra, both of them smiling. The Starling shuddered as it crossed the threshold of the Oracle fracture, her hull groaning like an old cathedral under the pressure of something that had no weight, only presence. James Cade kept his grip tight on the console, eyes locked on the viewport, where stars twisted into filaments and colors bled from the edges of space. There was no up or down here, no real time, no distance, just a slow creeping sensation that they were being watched by the void itself. Kane floated beside him, mag boots disengaged, watching the blackness with unreadable eyes. Feels like being inside someone's memory, he muttered. Someone who hated you? James didn't answer. He was thinking about the voice. I'm still here. But it's not just me anymore. That wasn't a cry for help. That was a warning. Sierra's synthesized voice broke the silence. Incoming signal. Nonlinear. Translating. The cockpit lights flickered. A dull hum began to rise from the floor. Low. Rhythmic. Mechanical. Then a pattern formed on the central console, a grid of light. Each cell flickered between red and white like some kind of code or lock. James reached out. The moment his fingers touched the display, the cockpit vanished. He stood on a dark plain beneath a copper sky. The ground beneath his boots was cold and smooth, etched with intersecting lines of light, like circuitry, too ancient to function, but too sacred to decay. He wasn't alone. Figures stood in the distance, humanoid but indistinct, like shadows wearing human skin. Their faces were blurred, pixelated. All but one, Lyra. She stood at the center of the grid, barefoot, her jumpsuit torn and burned, her eyes glowing softly with a light James had never seen in her before. Not panic, not fear, understanding. James, she said. Her voice came from everywhere. This place isn't broken. It's alive. He walked toward her step by step, each footfall sending tiny ripples of light across the grid. Where are we? He asked. In the in-between, the phantom grid, a layer of forgotten architecture beneath space-time, built by something, or someone. She reached out, and her hand phased through his. You're not fully here, she said. Not yet. Then bring me the rest of the way. I can't. They won't let me. He turned. The figures had drawn closer. He could see now. No mouths, no eyes, just vertical ridges and blank heads, like seals waiting to be broken. They were trapped here when the Oracle fracture formed, Lyra whispered. Refugees of a failed reality. And now they think I'm one of them. You're not. I'm becoming. He felt heat behind him. The grid lit up, red, hostile, reacting to his presence like a virus. They see you as a threat, she said. I am. James awoke with a violent gasp back in the Starling, drenched in sweat. The cockpit was still intact. Kane stared at him, face pale. You flatlined for 40 seconds, the doctor said. Your brainwaves. James, you were somewhere else. Nodded slowly, wiping blood from his nose. I saw her. And? She's alive, but she's not alone. And she's not coming back the way we hoped. Syra's voice chimed in again. Telemetry confirms the presence of a non-Euclidean object 4,000 meters ahead. Dimensions fluctuating. Composition unknown. James stood and fastened his harness. Then we go meet the neighbors. The phantom grid wasn't just a memory space. It was a prison, and James Cade had just been marked as its first new inmate in a very, very long time. The Starling was no fortress. Its hull was older than its captain and patched with stolen alloys and wishful thinking, but it drifted into the Oracle fracture like it belonged. James stood at the helm, eyes fixed on the twisted geometry ahead. It wasn't space in the traditional sense. It was memory masquerading as matter, a storm of broken realities trapped in recursive time loops, folding endlessly in on themselves. Behind him, Kane secured the last of the neural stabilizers to his temple. "You're sure about this?" "No," James replied, "but I'm ready." Syra's voice was lower now, quieter, as if she too felt reverence for what they approached. Entering threshold, prepare for sensory distortion. The cockpit lights dimmed. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the ship and the syncopated beat of James' own heart. Then everything broke. It wasn't like entering a storm. It was like being peeled apart. Reality became fractured glass. Memories not his own flickered across his vision. Battles he hadn't fought, worlds he hadn't walked. His father's voice, a kiss from someone with silver eyes, the smell of blood and fire and rain. Then silence. The Starling floated in an impossible place, a pocket between logic and decay. The sky was an ocean of torn code and frozen lightning. Broken spacecraft from across centuries hung in place as if arrested in the moment of their deaths. James blinked hard. "Kane, you seeing this?" Kane nodded slowly. "I think I'm seeing too much." At the center of the spatial graveyard stood something new, a spire, jet black, untextured, silent. It hadn't been in the drone's feed. It hadn't been in any Dominion map, but James knew it was meant for them. They docked at the base of the spire, where a perfectly circular port opened like a pupil dilating. No hiss, no sound, just an invitation. James stepped inside, Sierra's projection flickering to life beside him, a female silhouette formed of static and wireframe. "This structure is not physical," she warned. "It exists partially within your cognitive field. You are walking through memory as much as space." "Whose memory?" Kane asked. Syra paused. "Yours, James." The corridor bent toward infinity. Light flared from the walls in response to their presence. First blue, then red, then nothing. The walls turned black. A voice echoed from the darkness. "Familiar. Do you remember the last thing she said to you?" James froze. Kane frowned. "What is this?" "James," the voice repeated. "Do you remember? It was Lyra, but not the Lyra from the old camera photos." Her voice was strained, lower, almost synthesized. James pushed forward, and then he saw her, or what was left of her. She stood in the center of a chamber filled with data streams and suspended neural cores. Her body flickered, parts of her form dissolving into static. She was no longer entirely flesh, nor entirely free. "Lyra," he whispered. Her eyes met his, hollow, beautiful, terrified. "They're inside me now," she said. "The ones who built this place, they've been waiting. They called to me through the relic." Kane stepped back. "This isn't a rescue. This is a trap." "No," James said, stepping closer. "This is home for them. But we're the infection." Behind Lyra, forms began to emerge. Humanoid shapes, no eyes, no mouths, just smooth, pale masks and hands too long for their arms. The spire began to sing. The harmonic frequency ripped through the chamber. Data bled from the walls like oil. James grabbed Lyra's arm. "Can you walk?" "I can run." The escape was a blur. Alarms of no sound. Corridors that changed shape. Floors that flickered into stars. The Starling was already detaching from the spire when they reached it. Syra accelerated before the docking ramp. Had fully retracted. James looked back. The spire folded in on itself, like it was never there. But the memory remained, and so did Lyra. She lay on the med bay table, eyes open, scanning the ceiling like it was made of stories. "I remember everything now," she whispered. "They weren't creators. They were curators. Preservers of memory across the end of time." James sat beside her. "Why you?" "Because I didn't fight it. I listened." Kane ran diagnostics. Neural pathways rewired. Synaptic density tripled. Lyra wasn't just saved. She was evolving. James stood and looked out at the fracture. They had touched something eternal, and it had changed them all. The starling groaned as it breached the oracle fracture's outer skin, the hull rattling like a dying animal. Lights flickered across the console, warning indicators James had long ago taught himself to ignore. Sierra's voice crackled through the comms, distorted now like it was dragging itself through mud just to reach him. Temporal shear increasing. Hull integrity at 73%. Memory contamination risk high. "Risk is the job," James replied flatly. Kane was already strapped into the co-pilot seat, his eyes scanning Sierra's readouts like a battlefield medic triaging a mass casualty. "Contamination?" he muttered. "You mean like hallucinations, déjà vu, or worse," James said. "You start forgetting what's yours." The bridge went silent for a moment as the meaning sank in. Outside, the oracle fracture no longer looked like space. It was a folding prism of ruptured memory, entire planetary fragments, orbiting cities, dead ships, and collapsed moons frozen in impossible gravity wells. A planet-sized cathedral turned upside down, spun lazily in the distance, broadcasting a chime that wasn't sound, but feeling. Guilt, grief, wonder. Then they saw it. The memory engine. It hovered like a god's broken crown, a massive, pulsing latticework of obsidian spires spiraling around a single glowing orb the size of a city block. Energy, not electromagnetic, not plasma, but experiential, rippled across it in slow waves. Echo Ido. This was it. This was what had taken Lyra. This was what had been calling. "It's beautiful," Kane whispered. "No," James said. "It's designed to be." They brought the ship in closer. James initiated a docking tether from the Starling's forward port, locking onto one of the floating spires. The second the tether latched, the world shifted. Not the world outside, the world inside. James staggered, suddenly standing in a hallway he hadn't seen in a decade, his childhood home. The floor was scorched in places, as it had been after the orbital strike. The glass windows reflected a younger version of himself, barefoot, bloodstained, holding Lyra's hand, as Dominion fire rained from the sky. "No," he whispered. "Not this again." A voice behind him. "You left us." He turned. Lyra, 13 years old, alive, but wrong. Her eyes glowed with the same light as the memory engine. Her mouth didn't move when she spoke. "You keep chasing ghosts?" She said, "But you never ask why they're still running." Then the hallway cracked apart like glass. James slammed back into the present, gasping, gripping the console. Kane had collapsed to his knees, whispering a name James didn't recognize. "Syra!" James barked. The AI's voice sputtered like a flame on its last breath. "Neural destabilization in progress. Disconnect now, or—" "No." James stood, grabbing the analog camera from his hip. The orb at the center of the memory engine, its core, was flickering now, pulsing erratically like a dying heartbeat. And somewhere inside it, he knew, she was waiting. He sprinted down the corridor toward the airlock, throwing on his helmet mid-run. "James, what are you doing?" Kane shouted behind him. "What I came here to do." The airlock hissed open into black nothingness. The spire beneath his boots was solid but shimmered like smoke. As he walked toward the core, figures began to form from the darkness. People he had lost. His mother, his squadmates from the Valor skirmishes, a girl named Anna he hadn't thought of in years, and Lyra, she was closest. She walked beside him now, hair floating like in the camera photo, voice like wind. "You don't have to save me, James. I'm part of it now." "I'm not here to save you," he whispered. "I'm here to bring you back." She stopped. Her eyes widened, not in fear, but recognition. "You're using the camera," she said. He raised it, pointed it at the orb, took the shot. Click! The moment froze. Time unraveled. The orb shrieked in silence. The world inverted. When he woke, he was back on the Starling. The photo was in his hand. Lyra's face, but older now. Present, real, and, behind her, cracks in the orb. The memory engine ruptured. Kane hovered over him, bruised and sweating. "We almost lost you." James sat up. Looked at the stars through the viewport. "Not me," he said softly. "Them." He stared at the photo again, and this time Lyra smiled. The Starling groaned as it tore through the veil of the Oracle fracture, the very fabric of space twisting and folding around the ship's hull like liquid metal. Outside the viewport, the stars bent into surreal arcs, colors bleeding and warping in impossible ways. The air inside the cockpit felt heavier, thick with tension and static. James sat rigid in his pilot's chair, knuckles white on the controls. Kane and the rest of the crew were strapped in, eyes locked on the flickering monitors that refused to make sense of the fractured universe outside. "Sensor grids are unstable," Sierra warned, her voice clipped but steady. "Interference levels are reaching critical thresholds. Recommend manual override." James nodded without looking away from the viewport. "Manual it is. Keep an eye on the anomaly patterns. We'll need to thread through this like walking a razor's edge." Time warped. Seconds stretched, then snapped back. The ship's thrusters emitted strained howls as they fought the invisible forces twisting the very air. The crew's breaths echoed in the confined space, tense, shallow, almost synchronized. In their silent fear, suddenly a shudder ran through the ship. Alarms blared. The lights dimmed as power fluctuated. "Damage report," James barked. "Shields are flickering," Kane responded, fingers flying across the diagnostic panel, hull integrity holding, but barely. That gravitational eddy, we're skimming, is destabilizing rapidly. Through the chaos, a voice, faint but unmistakably real, whispered through the comm, "James! Listen!" He froze. "Lyra!" The cockpit's ambient noise fell away, replaced by a piercing silence. Then, images began to bleed into his HUD, fractured glimpses of a place both alien and eerily familiar. Massive statues carved from obsidian stone, their eyes hollow voids, halls that twisted like serpents, walls adorned with glyphs pulsing in a language he couldn't decipher, shadows moving just beyond sight. Where are you?" James murmured. "I'm trapped. Not just me. Others, too. The fracture feeds on memory, on time itself." "It's alive, James. And it's hungry." The crew exchanged anxious glances. This was beyond any salvage mission. This was a descent into the unknown. James gritted his teeth. "We're coming for you. Hold on." Syra's voice returned, cold and mechanical. "Warning, spatial distortion, increasing exponentially. Estimated collapse within 5 minutes. James pushed the throttle forward. The Starling surged deeper into the anomaly, engines straining, lights flickering like a dying star. Outside, the fractured space cracked open like glass, revealing a shadowy maw lined with shifting geometric patterns and a deep abyss glowing. Faintly blue, the void beckoned. James swallowed hard. This was the moment of no return. "Prepare for everything," he said quietly. "We're stepping into the heart of the fracture." The Starling crossed the threshold where light bent and time unraveled. The maw of the Oracle fracture yawned before them, a living wound in the cosmos, swirling with iridescent tendrils of energy that seemed both electric and organic. It pulsed in rhythms that felt like a heartbeat, slow and ominous. Inside the cockpit, the crew's faces were pale, eyes wide with a mix of awe and terror. Kane's fingers trembled on the med-station controls, while Sierra's synthetic voice remained unnervingly calm despite the chaos. James stared into the abyss beyond the viewport. The stars behind the fracture were long gone, replaced by a storm of shimmering fragments, shards of lost worlds, shattered timelines, and memories suspended in the void. "This place?" Kane whispered. "It's like the universe's scrapbook. Pieces of everything that ever was or could have been." James swallowed the lump in his throat and adjusted the ship's manual controls, steering toward a pulsating core deep inside the fracture. The air in the cockpit thickened, pressing against them like an invisible force. Static crackled over. The comms and strange whispers echoed through the hull. Suddenly the viewport flickered, and a scene from James's past flashed, vivid and raw. The last day with Lyra, her laugh, light and carefree, echoing in the corridors of the Dominion battleship before the breach. The memory felt too real, like a ghost reaching out through the void. "Focus," James snapped. "This place is playing tricks on our minds." The ship's internal systems flickered wildly as the fracture's influence intensified. The hull groaned under stresses not of this reality. Panels sparked. Warning lights flashed red. Kane moved to stabilize the failing systems, sweat beading on his brow. Then the impossible happened. The ship's sensors detected movement ahead. Not debris, but something alive. A shadow, fast, shifting, and malformed, emerged from the swirling energy. It hovered, a monstrous silhouette with tendrils that seemed to dissolve and reform, eyes like dying stars burning coldly in the depths. James's breath caught. What is that?" Syra responded. "Unknown entity. Likely a manifestation of the fracture's sentience or trapped consciousness." The entity pulsed, and the ship's hull vibrated in resonance. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. "James," Kane said, voice tense, "if that thing reaches us, we're done. We need to get out. Now." But James's gaze was fixed on the apparition. "No. Lyra said there are others trapped here. This is their prison. If we don't face it now, we'll never find her, or anyone else." The shadow advanced, tendrils weaving through the fractured space, reaching for the starling. James gripped the controls, heart pounding. "Brace for impact!" The ship rocked violently as the entity slammed into the hull like a cosmic storm. Power systems failed, gravity fluctuated, alarms blared. In the chaos, James's mind sharpened. The fracture was not just a place, it was a living labyrinth of memory and loss. To survive, to save Lyra, they'd have to navigate its twisted corridors, confront its ghosts, and face their deepest fears. "Steady," James commanded. "We fight through this together." As the entity's tendrils clawed at the ship, a new resolve sparked in the crew's eyes. This was no longer a salvage mission. It was a battle for souls lost to the void. The starling plunged deeper into the maw of memory, where past and present collided, and where the greatest dangers waited unseen. The starling shuddered violently as it plunged deeper into the heart of the Oracle fracture. The air inside the cockpit grew heavy, almost suffocating, charged with a static that seemed to crawl beneath the crew's skin. The shadows outside, the viewport twisted and shimmered like memories bleeding through a fractured veil. James sat rigid, fingers locked on the controls, his eyes scanning the fragmented space for any sign of Lyra or the next threat lurking in this cosmic graveyard. Syra's voice broke through the tension, calm but insistent. Life signs detected ahead. Multiple entities, unknown origin. "Show me," James ordered. The viewport rippled like water disturbed by a stone, and suddenly the starling drifted into a cavernous void. Massive, broken monoliths floated suspended in space, each etched with symbols older than any language James had ever seen. Their surfaces glowed faintly, illuminating ghostly figures wandering among the ruins. "Their memories," Kane whispered from behind, "trapped souls, echoes of lives lost to the fracture." James's breath caught. Some figures moved, with purpose. Others were frozen in moments of terror or despair. And there, just ahead, was a faint flicker of movement unlike the others. "Lyra?" James whispered, hope and doubt wrestling in his voice. The figure shimmered, and for a moment the space between them warped into a lucid vision. Lyra, standing amidst the ruins, reaching out, her eyes wide and pleading, locked with James's. Through the void! Suddenly, a harsh jolt ripped James from the vision. Alarm screamed as the starling's hull was hammered by unseen forces. The shadow entity from before surged forward again, its tendrils lashing out like the fingers of some ancient nightmare. Evasive maneuvers. James barked, twisting the controls as the ship wove through the fractured debris. Sparks rained inside the cockpit as systems failed and rebooted erratically. Kane rushed to stabilize the power grid. "If this keeps up, we'll lose propulsion." "No. Way we're giving up now," James growled, jaw clenched. "Lyra's counting on us." Syra's sensors detected another anomaly, a pulse of raw energy emanating from the fractured ruins below. "That's our chance," James said, eyes burning with determination. "If we can reach that energy source, maybe we can unlock the fracture's secrets. Maybe we can bring everyone back." The starling descended toward the glowing core of the ruins, weaving past shards of collapsed realities, fragments of cities, faces, moments caught in endless rewind. The ship's hull groaned as it skirted the edges of spatial collapse. As they approached, the eerie whispers became a chorus, fragments of voices speaking in lost tongues, begging, warning, pleading. Then the core erupted. Blinding light flooded the cockpit. The ship trembled on the edge of disintegration. In that moment, James felt the fracture itself reach into his mind, threading memories, fears, and hope into a living tapestry. He saw Lyra again, standing not as a victim, but as a guardian, her silhouette framed by the swirling energy. "James," her voice echoed in his mind, clear and resolute. "You have to believe this place can be healed." With every ounce of strength, James pushed the starling forward toward the core's heart. The fractal storm around them roared, but so did James's resolve. In this crucible of memory and loss, he was no longer just a salvage hunter. He was the fracture's last hope. Time inside the Oracle fracture lost all meaning. Jeff stood at the helm of the starling, jaw clenched as reality blurred at the edges of the viewport. The stars outside moved like spilled ink on paper, swirling in, chaotic patterns that defied logic. Syra struggled to maintain spatial integrity. Kane was on the verge of collapse from neural strain, and the rest of the crew had fallen silent, retreating inward. Haunted by ghosts, the fracture stirred inside them, but not Jeff. His focus was razor-thin, trained on the crystalline beacon glowing at the fracture's epicenter, the heart of memory. It pulsed with a rhythm that seemed tied to his heartbeat. And somewhere in that endless tangle of warped space and psychic echoes, Lyra was waiting, not just as a fragment or memory, but alive. Syra's voice was strained, fragmented. "Jeff, if you proceed, you will not be the same. Identity threshold? Breaking—" "I wasn't planning on being the same," Jeff muttered. He left the controls to Kane, whose pale face was streaked with sweat, and stepped into the descent pod. A sleek, coffin-like capsule, modified for entry into unstable gravity wells. He strapped himself in and clutched his analog camera. "Don't wait for me," he said. Kane looked up with red eyes. "You know, I will." Jeff didn't argue. The pod launched, a burst of fire and inertia, as it plunged toward the crystalline field. The deeper he went, the less the laws of physics mattered. His thoughts echoed audibly. Memories played across the interior of the pod. He saw Lyra as a child, saw his own regrets, saw moments that never happened, futures unchosen. Then came the voice, not Lyra's, not his own, but something older. "You seek to steal from the fracture, but you are part of it now," Jeff gritted, his teeth. "Then I'll tear myself free." The pod hit the surface of the heart, and everything shattered. Jeff woke standing somehow. He stood in a field of light shaped like glass. Around him, fragments floated in suspension, each one a scene: Lyra building their first ship, his parents on Earth, long before the wars, the first time he stole a Dominion transmitter for the rebellion. A figure moved among the fragments, not Lyra himself, but older, scarred, wearing armor laced with gold circuitry and a haunted look in his eyes. "What is this?" Jeff asked, heart racing. The older Jeff turned, voice like gravel. "This is the you who gave up, who let Lyra die to save the world." Jeff's jaw tightened. "I didn't come this far to give up," the older version sneered. "Then prove it." He lunged. The duel was brutal, but more psychic than physical. Every move sent ripples of memory clashing through the air. Jeff dodged a strike and was thrown into a shard that showed Lyra alone in the dark, whispering his name. He roared and surged forward, slamming his future self into a fragment of Earth, of childhood. The glass exploded in light. Silence returned, and then, from the heart of the chamber, Lyra appeared. No illusion, no distortion. She ran to him, her arms around him before he could even speak. "You came," she whispered. "Always," Jeff replied. The heart of memory trembled. Syra's voice crackled in through the fracture. "The archive is destabilizing, collapse imminent. Reunification is causing spatial dissonance." Jeff grabbed Lyra's hand. "How do we get out?" She looked around, then into his eyes. "We remember the way." Together they focused. The scene rebuilt itself in reverse. The pod, the ship, the crew, the breach. As the fracture collapsed inward, a tunnel of pure thought opened, and they ran. Behind them, the oracle fracture folded into itself, the scream of a dying memory swallowed by silence. The starling reeled in the pod just in time. Back aboard, Kane pulled Jeff and Lyra from the capsule. The crew, what remained of them, gathered in awed silence. Lyra blinked in the starlight, breathing fresh air for the first time in years. Jeff held her hand. "A Tierra," he said. "Yes, Captain?" "Set course for nowhere in particular." "Yes." "Captain?" The stars stretched, shimmered, and opened wide, and Jeff smiled. "Let's finally live." The core of the pale archive had changed. Gone was the cold metallic stillness. In its place rose vast glass temples, crystalline and impossible in their symmetry, reflecting fragments of memory and time in shifting panes. Each structure floated in the void, tethered not by mass, but by intent. The archive was reacting, reconfiguring, around James's determination to reach Lyra. Kane stood by the entrance, his pulse rifle drawn but lowered. He was visibly shaken. "It's building these for you, James. Or for her. Maybe both." James nodded, eyes fixed on the largest temple at the center. Its entrance pulsed with a soft golden hue. "Syra, keep us linked. If I break comms, I will initiate neural backup every 60 seconds. Proceed with caution." James stepped into the temple. Immediately, he was somewhere else. Not metaphorically, literally. The temple was a multi-dimensional fold, and inside it, the laws of reality bent like reeds in wind. He stood in his childhood bedroom, then a Dominion cell, then on a ruined ship, watching Lyra disappear again and again. The floor beneath him cracked, revealing memories he had buried deep. The face of a man he had let die, in a mission gone wrong, a friend, a brother. James forced himself forward. In the center chamber, he saw her. Lyra stood still, encased in a web of golden threads. Her eyes moved. She was alive. "Lyra!" She looked at him, but didn't speak. Instead, the walls began to hum. A voice rose. Not hers, not Syra's. "The archive itself. You demand what you have no right to reclaim. Memory belongs to the archive. Emotion feeds the system. She is harmony." James stepped forward. "She is my sister." The threads tightened. Lyra cried out. James raised the camera. "You feed on memory? Then take this." Click, the flash ignited. A chain reaction. The golden threads recoiled as the camera's analog soul, pure, unaffiliated data, spiked through the memory matrix. The archive shuddered. Syra's voice screamed in his ear. "Collapse imminent! We're losing anchor!" James reached for Lyra as the temple disintegrated. Their hands met, and together they fell. They didn't fall far, at least not physically. Instead, the archive spiraled them inward, folding memory and matter into a singularity of thought. James and Lyra were weightless, wrapped in a dream of fractured light and echoing moments. The archive was breaking, but it would not die quietly. Syra's voice returned as a distant hum. Cognitive load reaching terminal threshold, memory bleed approaching critical mass. James clutched Lyra's hand tighter. "We have to move." But where? The space around them was no longer space at all. Instead, it was a tapestry of scenes. James's first spacewalk, Lyra building her first scout drone, the night they buried their father. The archive was unraveling itself, sacrificing layers of stolen memory to trap them inside a maze of familiarity. "It's trying to keep us here," Lyra said. Her voice was her own again, older, rasped, but undeniably hers. James nodded. "Because we're a part of it now, but we can still rewrite the ending." They swam through the memories, passing figures they recognized and didn't, fragments of others who had been lost in the oracle fracture. Each ghost reached out, trying to anchor them in guilt, in nostalgia, in regret. James reached to his belt and pulled out the analog camera, cracked but still functional. He aimed at the central point of the spiral, where light condensed into a burning nexus. Click. The photograph developed instantly, flaring so brightly it singed the air. The image was not of a memory. It was of the present, James and Lyra standing together, alive, defiant. The archive screamed. The memory storm collapsed. Reality returned like a flood. The Starling's interior reformed around them. Sparking panels, screaming engines, Kane shouting through static. "James!" Syra's losing power. What happened? James pulled Lyra through the cockpit door. "We burned the archive down." Kane blinked. "She's real." Lyra nodded weakly. "And so is what's coming next." Outside the ship, the oracle fracture was closing. Not sealing, not repairing, but condensing into a singular point, pulsing like a dying star. Sierra whispered through flickering speakers. "Fracture anomaly now contains residual archive intelligence. It is collapsing into a containment shell." James leaned back in his chair, breath ragged. "Then let it bury itself. We're done here." Lyra looked at him. "No, we're not. That place, it touched hundreds, maybe thousands. Some of them are still trapped in other folds." "And we'll find them," James said, "one by one." Kane groaned. "So we're relic hunters and memory liberators now?" James smiled for the first time in years. "We've always been more than we knew." The Starling turned away from the dying archive, its hull battered but whole. Ahead lay the stars, uncharted, unexplored, and this time they wouldn't just chase echoes, they'd rewrite them.